This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
It sounds like one of the names they would have for a monarch. It's like Queen Javia the First, Black Radical Queer, among queer Negro women.
All the way from the A, you listen to my favorite lesbian on BRQ.
I'm on my black girl magic voodoo shit, with the bamboo earrings on some new shit. I'm new when this mother asking who this bitch. I'm the bitch with the pussy with the judo grip.
Hey y'all, this is Javia Nicole, aka your favorite lesbian, and you're listening to Black Radical Queer Podcast, our stories on our own terms. Hey y'all, this is Javia Nicole, and I'm back with another episode of Black Radical Queer Podcast. Today, I want to talk about intersectionality, and I know it's a word that I use a lot, and it's something too that I think maybe to a certain extent, I assume that my listeners automatically know what that means, or that because you're listening to this podcast, like you have some type of familiarity with intersectionality. But in light of a recent headline or a recent story situation that happened, I figured it would be something that I could talk about specifically in relation to Black people. As I've been, on Facebook and Twitter and stuff, I keep seeing people talk about Gina Rodriguez. Now, I've heard people talk about her before. I've heard that she said problematic things before, that she said anti-Black things before, just that she's a hot mess. So I wasn't surprised to kind of see some things swirling around in regards to her name and some comment that she made. But I, did my own research so that I could find out, I could get to the root of it and really see what is going on. Like, what does she do now? What's happening? And once I, did that exploration, then it really prompted me to want to, kind of just talk to y'all about intersectionality and specifically how it relates to Black folks. So, for those who don't know, I'll go ahead and give a little bit of background about what's going on with Gina Rodriguez these days and kind of the controversy surrounding some stuff she said. And then I'll, jump into just kind of my thoughts on it and tying that into what I've been thinking about in terms of intersectionality and why I think it's important that we look at it specifically through a Black lens. So my main source, because I read a bunch of stuff, I've seen a lot of things circulating on social media, but one of the outlets that I rely on is The Root. So I'll reference that article and I'll give a little bit of information from that. So that way, for those who don't know about her or whatever, at least I can get a little bit of background information so they know where I'm coming from in this particular episode. So this article is on The Root. I'll make sure I include the link in the show notes. But it says, "Meet Gina Rodriguez, the Latina actress who refuses to allow Black women to ever be great." Now, it says, Gina done it again. As people of color, we all face specific challenges that are unique to our environments and ethnic identities. But once variables such as gender or class come into play, life can get infinitely more complicated and arduous. Ask Black women. But never ask Jane the Virgin star Gina Rodriguez, who habitually makes it a point to compare her plight to other women of color or outright erase the context and identity of her melanated contemporaries as a 15-time gold medalist in the Oppression Olympics. Her latest faux pas comes courtesy of a roundtable discussion she held with Gabrielle Union, Emma Roberts, and Ellen Pompeo on Net A Porter's big television debate. So they were talking about pay disparities in Hollywood. And this is the quote from Gina. She says, "I get so petrified in this space talking about equal pay, especially when you look at the intersectional aspect of it, right? Where white women get paid more than Black women get paid more than Asian women get paid more than Latina women. And it's like a very scary space to step into." All right, so let's just pause there. So, of course, she's gotten plenty of side eye and criticism for this statement. And this is not the first or second time that Gina Rodriguez has said something where she's basically essentially kind of like making it seem like, oh, well, Latina women just have it the hardest of all, or throwing Black women under the bus. And it's really ridiculous to me, especially when so many Black women have worked to be those people who kind of paved the way for other women of color. And we know that other women of color do get treated a lot of times better than Black women. So a lot of people were just like, okay, girl, what you talking about? Because like one of the highest paid woman of color actress is Sofia Vergara. And they were looking at kind of like top 10 highest paid actresses. And the only Black woman on that list is Kerry Washington. And she is not as high on the list as Sophia. So I don't know where Gina's getting her information from, but it's like, girl, why you gotta make it out to be some type of, competition? And you're wrong. And I don't understand why she always like hinges her argument on Black women or saying, oh, well, we have it worse than Black women or Black, that kind of thing. And I'm like, why does it have to be like that? Because that's not what Black women are doing. So I don't understand why she has to do that. I understand, but it's fucked up that's what she does. And she has a habit of doing that. And my thing is, OK, what about, and this is what a lot of people asked her. They're like, well, what about Afro-Latina actresses? What about actresses who are both? So she, Gina's talking about, the intersectional aspect, when in reality, she's not being intersectional at all. She's actually using that as a means of erasure. And so I thought that it was timely. It's always something that's timely because it's always something that comes up in some way or another. Someone is always kind of like saying, oh, well, kind of throwing Black folks under the bus and that kind of thing. And like, oh, we have it so much harder. But I'm like, why do you have to kind of like pin your oppression or whatever on us or use that as a comparison or whatever? And a lot of times it's not relevant. It's like, just you can explain or share what your plight is without having to juxtapose it against Black women. You could just say Latina women are underrepresented and underpaid. It doesn't have to be like, oh, well, Black women make more than. Are you kidding? OK, so you're false. And it's bullshit. When in reality, you could just you can have your own argument that is just outside of that. You don't have to utilize that for an argument. So anyway, I say all that to say, so that's like my little intro or just kind of what intersectionality is, something I think about all the time. But just at this point in time, that situation is something that got me thinking. Another thing that when people start talking about this most recent situation with Gina Rodriguez, they brought up an old interview, and it was like her and Yara Shahidi on an interview together. And the interviewer was like talking to Yara and was like, oh, how does it feel to be such a role model for young Black women and all this kind of stuff? And Gina interrupts and is like, oh, for all women. So she, swerved on some all lives matter type shit. And the interviewer, came back with like, OK, well, yes, women, but I mean specifically Black, and said I specifically mean Black women or whatever. And didn't let Gina just kind of like, turn that into an all lives matter. But it's so ridiculous to me. For one, it's contradictory for you to be like, oh, well, all women. But then on the flip side, you're saying, well, Black women get paid more and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, for real, girl. OK, all right. So it doesn't make sense. So it brings me back to this point of intersectionality. And something that's a big part of that is that what people need to understand is that, number one, Black and person of color is not the same. Black and POC are not synonyms. They're not interchangeable. They don't mean the same thing. The things that come along with them are not the same. And just because there are similarities does not mean they are the same. They can have things in common, but they are not the same. They're just not. So and in reality, it is a form of erasure to kind of do this lump together POC. But it's like, but there are things that are specific to the Black experience that other POC don't go through. And anti-Blackness is global. So anti-Blackness is perpetuated by people of color as well as by white people. So it's important that we make that distinction. And I think that, of course, POC is seen as more PC, it seems more politically correct. And so it's kind of like, that's what people use and they feel like that's the best thing to do. And it's inclusive and all that, when in reality, it has an element of erasure because POC is just not the same as Black. And it's OK to specifically and deliberately say Black. But we've been made to think that it's divisive and it's problematic to just straight up say Black. I can say Black women. I don't have to say all women. I can say Black people. I don't have to say all people of color, because that's not always the case. Sometimes it is something that is specifically a Black issue. So I think that we have to be able to draw those parallels and see where, yeah, there are commonalities in our experiences as non-white people. However, there are things that are specific to Black people, and it's okay for us to say that specifically. So, so that's something that is interesting to me, but it takes me back to just thinking about intersectionality in general. So when I think about intersectionality, I think about just kind of how that term came to be. And then I think about feminism. So the whole point of intersectionality is to look at how you have these concurrent like you're marginalized in multiple ways and how those things intersect. But it specifically came from the plight of Black women and looking at how Black women could not look at themselves as just women or just Black because those things were intertwined. So it's really important that we don't lose that as we think about intersectionality. And it's something that, for one, we have to remember, like, that was its original purpose. Its original purpose was to hone in on specifically the plight of Black women and the intersection of their Blackness and their womanhood. It later on grew to be utilized by other people of color and other marginalized groups. But let's be clear that it did start out as a framework to really, as an analytical framework to explore the impact of how Blackness and womanhood intersect. So we need to be clear on that. And then other people started using that as a theoretical framework to look at their own, to look at the plight of other marginalized and oppressed people. And it's relevant and it's a beneficial framework to use, but we need to be clear that where it came from, number one, and number two, that it did highlight Blackness specifically. It didn't just say people of color, women of color. It said Black women. And then it went on to encompass, women of color and other marginalized groups. So this is the thing. Our society and just people in general, like the world, because anti-Blackness is so global, there is this tendency to take Black brilliance and Black ideas and things like that are specifically Black and take them and run with them. And then have the audacity to feel some kind of way if you get called out about it. So even thinking about intersectionality, folks feel a way if you're like, well, this is from a Black woman. This is from the mind. This is the brainchild of a Black woman. Then people feel some kind of way about that because they're like, oh, well, this applies to all people of color and blah, blah, blah. It can be utilized, but let's not forget where it came from. And don't take our shit and run with it and then try to use it against us and then try to erase us from it. And that is what happens. And that's part of our lived experience in general, is that we can do, whether it's style, culture, language, all those kind of things. We are innovators, whether it's academically, theoretically, culturally, stylistically, whatever it be. We're innovators. And then at large, society will take our shit and run with it and then try to, either use it against us or erase us from it or exclude us from it. And intersectionality is one of those things. And so people need to understand by kind of lumping in and just saying POC, because there are cases where that is appropriate or cases where, you can say people of color, but there are also situations where you need to specifically say Black. You don't have to look at Black. Black is not a dirty word. So it's not some negative thing, or it's not a divisive thing for us to specifically say Black and for us to point out Black experiences and to straight up say that. So by kind of, being lumped into this kumbaya POC thing all the time, when it's not, sometimes it's just not relevant or it's not pertinent, or it's not beneficial to do so. What it is a form of erasure. And so it's just another way that we get erased from our own shit. Intersectionality is a framework created by Black women, and then we get erased from it. So it really doesn't make sense. But that's how our society operates, is that we create shit and we get erased from it. So we can say like slang or like dances. Those things are, we create these things and then they're appropriated and they're commandeered and they're colonized and they're, and they're taken over, and then we get erased from it. And then when we do it, we're looked at like we're wrong. So style is a big example of that. You can have, like, let's say for instance, braids. We all know about the foolishness where cornrows were called boxer braids. And we're like, are you serious? So a black girl is ghetto for wearing braids, but a white girl is stylish and trendy and, whatever. So it's the same thing with looking at intersectionality and this whole thing about POC or WOC, people of color, women of color, as opposed to saying black people and black women. It's the same thing. It's that erasure, because if I say this is something that's specific to black women, like when the interviewer was like, oh, you're a role model to black women, and you coming in with the erasure of being like, oh, this is for all, or this is for all people of color. And it's like, well, no, because we don't all have the same struggles. There may be some overlap and some parallels, but they're not all the same. They're just not. So it's not fair to automatically lump them all together. And whether people realize it or not, it is a form of erasure to do so. It is a way to, it's like you're saying that you're including, that like blackness is included in that people of color thing. But in reality, it's a way to kind of like mute it or dilute it. And really kind of take away from the specificity of saying black. So that really bothers me because I think that is something that's so pervasive. And you'll see, I don't know about y'all, but I know I'll see so many let's say post or just stuff on social media, and it might specifically say black, and somebody come on there and they're like people of color, and we all go through, and I'm just like, there are other ways to do things besides piggybacking off of black folks and piggybacking off of black women. For one, it's not the oppression Olympics, and for two, like folks need to create their own shit. Everything doesn't have to be on our backs, and that's how our world operates. So people, instead of kind of like building their own shit, what they do is piggyback on us and kind of use us as the mules and just kind of use that as their starting point instead of building their own shit. And so it gets frustrating because like, how you going to build your shit on mine and then try to erase me? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. But that's how it goes. So instead of just like in a situation with Gina Rodriguez, instead of just saying, because it is valid to just say Latina women are underpaid. Latino women are, are not paid enough. They're not represented enough, whatever. Those are all valid things to say. Why does it have to be juxtaposed against black women? It's not necessary. So the fact that you feel like that's the way to do it that's what's divisive. And that's what's, it's sad really, because it's like, that's what you have to pin your whole argument on when your argument can stand alone. So why do you have to infuse it with anti-blackness just to, get ahead? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, there's this, common thing of which, because there was a comment somebody made where, so this is Helen Doan. She said, since forever, black actors, actresses, and directors pried open Hollywood's door and held it open for the rest of us. I'm certain that what Viola Davis got for Widows and How to Get Away with Murder, she wasn't paid enough for her talent. And so she was like, Gina Rodriguez missed the whole mark, on that. And that's my thing. So I'm like, okay, well, we can do the work. We can lay the foundation, help other people get to where they need to be, give them a hand up, give them a leg up and all that kind of stuff. And yet we're the problem. Like your anger, your whatever is misplaced. And that's my issue. It's like, you're misplacing the issues that you have. Like, we are not oppressing you. And that's what's ridiculous to me, because I'm like, black women ain't oppressing you. Black women not keeping you from getting paid at all. Black people are not limiting your representation at all. Like, that's not what's happening. So why are you making it seem like, oh, well, I don't know. It's so ridiculous to me. So I think it's important that in someone's feedback to her or their critique of her, they're like, hey, actually, we have a long history of black folks, leading the way and kind of like holding the door open for us and helping us to get in. It hasn't been this divisive thing. So the comment I mentioned about like Sofia Vergara, when people were just like, oh, well, black women get paid more. And I'm like, that's just false. So if you look at the Forbes list talking about the highest paid actresses, so it says Sofia Vergara is the highest paid according to Forbes, $42.5 million. Kerry Washington is the only black actress on that list, and she's on number 8 in terms of the top 10 highest paid actresses for 2018. So what are you saying? Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, there's no black actress that's making more. Like, and the things that black actresses have to do and how long it takes for them to even make some money, just those kind of things. Like, they put in their time, they play all these roles, and they're not getting paid anywhere near what their counterparts are being paid. So it's like, why are you making it seem like black actresses are doing better? And when that's not even a necessary component, it doesn't have to be a necessary component of your argument. Like, you can really just say, hey, we're not getting paid what we need to get paid. So, and then too, it's like, that there are women who are Black and Latina. Like, you don't have to, someone put it like perfectly. They said, this is Sophia Quintero. She said, it is quite possible for Gina Rodriguez to advocate for better Latino representation without constantly evoking African-American advances in a way that implies they're part of the problem. If she refuses to learn that, her cultural activism actually perpetuates the problem. And that's exactly what I'm saying. You don't have to throw Black women under the bus just to get ahead. And the fact that that's what the mindset is very problematic. And yet, these are the folks who want to say, oh, people of color, and we're all in this together, and POC. And I'm like, no, that's going to be a no. So we need to be mindful of that. My other thing in regards to, I'm going to move on from Gina. Well, I don't know. I might circle back, but that was kind of just what got me thinking about intersectionality. So just looking at intersectionality more broadly, the reality is, the reason why POC is not interchangeable or not synonymous with Black, because we have to look at the way that our Blackness literally colors everything. It colors our experiences. It colors our womanhood. It colors our queerness for those of us who are queer or whatever. It impacts everything. And so it's not in the same way as other people of color. Everybody has to look at it from their own cultural, ethnic, or whatever lens. So by looking at POC as like this more acceptable thing, it's making Black out to be like it's erasing the Blackness. It's pushing it out and making it seem like, oh, that's a bad thing to say, and whatever, which is just some coded bullshit. So it's just a more, covert. It's a more covert way to, really employ that erasure. But, it's not a bad thing for us to kind of specifically look at how Blackness impacts things. We don't have to always, lump in everybody else. And part of that too ties into this, we have been trained and molded to carry so much stuff and to kind of be the advocate for everybody and to be the savior for everybody and to pave the way for everybody and be the workhorse for everybody, that we feel like we always have to like include everybody. When we look at our plight, when we look at intersectionality, we feel like when we speak, we have to include everybody. And that's not true. That's not the case. We don't have to include everybody. It's okay for us to have some kind of exclusivity, and it's okay for us to sometimes just focus on ourselves. And so, but we've been trained and indoctrinated to believe that we always have to like include everybody else. And we got to carry everybody else on our backs, and that's not the case for anybody else. Because when other people are talking about their struggles, it's not an automatic thing that they feel like they have to include Black folks. So if it's people who are Latino, Asian, whatever the case may be, whatever their ethnicity, their race, their cultural background may be, when they talk about the struggles of their people, there's not that same sense of obligation to include Black folks or to like kind of have to carry us on their backs. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for us. It's always the other way around. It's us carrying folks on our backs and we're not getting reciprocity. So it's like we're down for everybody. We're involved in everybody's movements. We're standing up for everybody, and we're not getting that reciprocity at all. I saw this post on Facebook, and I wish I could find the actual, like whatever the story was, or I actually don't know if it was a news story. I feel like this may have just been someone's personal experience or they just saw it, whatever. But anyway, they were talking about how they went to like an Asian restaurant and it was like a Black person, and they said some other Black person was saying something negative about Asian people or something, and they kind of like went off on them and was like defending the Asian folks who work there and all that. But then at the same time, they're talking about how, Asian people perpetuate anti-Blackness and how those folks were, calling them the N-word and just all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, that's the thing. We feel like we have to be the champions for everybody, the advocates and the champions for all people of color. But we need to realize everybody else doesn't feel that way about us. It's not something that's reciprocal at all. And so like what I've talked about before in previous episodes about how we have to realize this whole thing about allyship and about, we say, oh, well, white women, have that expectation of us to show up for them and they don't give us the reciprocity. That is the same. It's the same for us with non-Black people of color. We don't get that same reciprocity. And the reality is Black women don't get reciprocity from anybody in like from anybody. So what we put out, we don't get that in kind. Like we don't get that to the same extent in return from anybody, from any demographic, but other Black women. Black queer folks get it from other Black queer folks. Black women get it from other Black women. Black trans folks get it from other Black trans folks. But on a large scale, Black women can be helping out white women. We're not getting that reciprocity from them. We're not getting the reciprocity from other women of color. We're not getting the reciprocity from Black men. We ain't getting the reciprocity. We're not getting what we put out from anybody. So it's okay for us to prioritize ourselves. And when we look at our struggles and stuff like that, we don't automatically have to shoulder everybody else's burdens and feel like we got to carry everybody to freedom. Black liberation is a thing. Like it's a framework, it's a concept. And we have to understand that no other group, entity is invested in our liberation like we are. Nobody is as invested in our liberation as we are. We are oftentimes invested in the liberation of everybody else. But the reality is a lot of these folks, they're concerned about basically getting free and they ain't worried about us. They got their own agendas. It's the same thing happens with a lot of Native Americans. There have been plenty of Black people and especially Black women and Black queer folks who advocate strongly for Native Americans, and anti-Blackness is very rampant in Native American culture. Like it's, you know what I mean? So it's like we go through that with everybody. We can advocate for all these different people, and that doesn't erase the anti-Blackness. They're not advocating for us on the same scale. And because I know some people are like, oh, well, this and the third, that's why I'm specifying on the same scale. It does not happen on the same scale. It just does not. It happens in small pockets, or it happens, in some ways, but it doesn't happen on the same scale. And what's evident, what's evidence of that is that it is a part of our kind of like the framework of Black womanhood. Like it's seen as our responsibility. We're supposed to shoulder the burden. And, the episode where I was talking about that post by the chick who was talking about the white lady who was like, oh, Black women, it's up to you. That's at this point, it's like a cultural norm. That's a cultural expectation of us to shoulder it. It's expected for us to be on the front lines. It's expected for us to advocate for everybody. It's expected for us to carry all this shit on our shoulders. We are expected to do that. No one else is expected to do that in the way that we are. And that's why I say it's not on the same scale, because it is so pervasive that it is considered to be a part of our personality, a part of our duty, a part of our makeup, just a part of our existence. This is just what we do. We carry every damn body. We advocate for everybody. We're on the front lines for everybody. We do the work. We're the workhorses. And so that's what the expectation is of us. And that's what whether it's on a micro or macro level, that is the expectation of us. And no one else is expected to do that to the same degree on the same scale, period. Nobody, no other group, no other people of color have that on them. No other. And it is intersectional, because it's like men don't have that expectation on them and no other people of color. So Black men don't have it. So it ain't just Black people. It's Black women, Black queer folks. We're the ones where that expectation is ingrained into the understanding of our identity. So we perpetuate it, and is continually placed on us. And nobody else goes through that in the same way. Not that I'm aware of. I don't see it. It just doesn't happen on that scale. So we have to be unapologetic. I talk a lot about being unapologetic, but we have to be very deliberate in the language we use. Words mean things. Language means stuff. Okay, so a lot of times we don't think about it. Folks are just saying, oh, people of color, Black folks. They say them like they're synonyms, and they say them interchangeably. And they're not thinking about the implications of that. Language is important. So we do need to think about the implications of language. And we need to think about that, because it means something different to say people of color, person of color, as opposed to Black. They don't mean the same thing. And it's okay for us to specifically say Black. I can't say that enough. Like we have to be okay with that. And because we feel that responsibility and this obligation to carry every damn thing in every damn body, that will lead us to do that, to make that switch and to say POC when we mean Black. If you mean people of color and if you mean that more broadly, then fine, we have the terminology for that. But if you're like, your inclination is to say POC when you know you mean black, then that's what I'm talking about. Like, we can say black. It's okay to say black when you mean black. You don't have to feel like, it's like we do this internal filtering where we're like, oh, I got to say POC. I have to, but it's like it's okay to be deliberate, and we have to look at what we're really expressing, what we're really saying. Because if what you're saying is, let's say you're talking about police brutality, right? Now, black people are not the only people of color who are impacted by police brutality. However, it's about scale. We are impacted to the highest degree. Closely behind us would be Latino, Hispanic, Latino, but we still are impacted by it greatly. And on a different scale. So it's okay to say police are killing black people. You don't have to say POC. Now, not saying it's untrue to say POC, but at the same time, if you specifically mean black, it's okay to say black. And we've just been we've been taught that that's a bad thing. We've been taught that that's divisive, and and really it's that underlying idea that we have to include everybody. And really, so it's that, and it's the fact that it's like, we see our struggles as less valid. Like, it's somehow invalid or less valid to say black as opposed to POC. So a part of that is we have been made to believe that we have to include this whole spectrum just to make our shit more valid, to make our issues more valid, our experiences more valid, our oppression more valid. And that's bullshit. I don't have to include all POC to make what I go through valid. But I mean, that's what we're taught. We're taught that we need all this extra shit to validate. And you see it in the way that, let's say, there was some situation where someone was killed. Let's say a cop killed a black person. So then, even in the way that people describe it, they're like, oh, well, this was a good person and he was in school. He was a saint. She fed all the children in the neighborhood. It's like, this person has to be painted out to be a saint to make the brutality against them more valid, to make it seem like, hey, it really is a crime. Because if we don't do that, then it's a problem. And then when we look at how these things are reported and people talk about the victim and they say, oh, this person was trespassing or they were doing this and the third. Okay, so you have plenty of folks who do worse things and they manage to make it out alive and go through their due process, but this black person doesn't make it out alive. We shouldn't have to validate our humanity, and that's what it comes down to. We've been taught, because anti-blackness is global and because there's so much erasure and because we are treated like second-class citizens or whatever, then we have been made to believe we have to validate our humanity. So we have to add all this extra stuff. For us to be worthy of not being treated terribly and not being brutalized, we have to be like, oh, but this is such a good they were such a good person. They volunteered 7 days a week and they worked and they took it. Like, it's like we're not allowed to be human. Our humanity is stripped away. You have to be perfect to validate if any wrong is done against you. And nobody has to do that to the same degree that we do. We have to do that on a much larger scale than other people of color. And so that's why sometimes it's very important to say black, because there are just things that impact black people in a way that other folks, that non-black people of color are not impacted. And we have to acknowledge that. It's important to explicitly say that black is not a dirty word. All of our experiences are not the same as all people of color. So it's okay. It's totally okay for us to say that and to own that. And it's really important that we do that, because we are being erased in so many different ways and on every level. The erasure is real. So whether it's like physically by like literally killing us, using coded language, so we're being erased physically, we're being erased theoretically, socially, and all those kind of things, all that factors in. So we really have to be cognizant of that. Like, we have to, and be very deliberate with the language we use and be unapologetic with the language that we use. So yeah, so that was my little, rant for the day. I've been thinking a lot about intersectionality, and I know that in certain spaces it is a term that's used a lot. And I think that it's important that, we really make sure that we understand what it means, that we understand where it comes from, and that we be unapologetic about looking at things through a lens of intersectionality, like truly looking at it that way. It doesn't always have to include everybody. It's just, that just is what it is. But anyway, okay. So as I kind of wrap up, since I was focusing on intersectionality, I want to give you all some information about intersectionality and just kind of I guess you could say a working definition. So intersectionality is an analytic framework that identifies how interlocking systems of power impact those who are most marginalized in society. And even that, I pulled that from Wikipedia. And even that is kind of watering it down. So looking at the background. So there's this paper that was written by Kimberly Crenshaw, and I have the paper saved. I need to look it up so I can see the title because it's kind of a long title and I don't remember the whole title off the top of my head. Okay, here it is. So in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw wrote a paper called Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. Okay. Long title. It's a good read. I have I have it saved. Like I have it on my phone because it's really important. And it's that foundational document, foundational framework, or just, thought process for the whole concept of intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw was the first person to actually use that term. And she was looking at how Black women specifically were impacted by domestic violence and just about like violence against women, because we look at violence against women on a broad scale or in a broad way. And she was saying that we have to look at it from an intersectional perspective because Black women are impacted by this as a woman and also as a Black person, and they can't separate those things. So they're impacted differently because of the intersection of their race and their gender. That's my best way of explaining it. It probably be a little better to do your own research on it. You could probably just search for Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality. Kimberly's name, though, is like instead of a Y on the end, it's an E. But yeah, so brilliant mind and very important work that she did. But yeah, which also reminded me one other thing I want to mention. I promise I'm gonna wrap up. So talking about intersectionality, the other thing it made me think about was feminism, because that ties back into some things I've talked about on previous episodes about the difference between kind of like this whole concept of allyship and white women and blah, blah, blah. That's the whole thought process, too, when you look at feminism versus womanism. Basically, we look at feminist thought and feminist theory, and the whole idea of womanism is because feminism in and of itself did not encompass the experience, that framework could not encompass the experience of Black women, because they can't just look at their womanhood. We can't just look at the experience of a Black woman through the lens of her womanhood only, because it is literally colored by her Blackness. And so that impacts her experience. So I think that's something that's important, too, that we keep in mind. Like, we do have to look at things through so many different lenses. And that's the whole point of intersectionality, is acknowledging that and kind of giving some kind of framework to do that. Yeah. So that's more so womanism is looking at, it's basically the I guess you could say intersectional feminism. I don't want to say intersectional feminism. It's just, it is a social theory, and it takes into consideration the experiences of Black women. So it's not just looking at it from womanhood, it's looking at, okay, how your Blackness is impacting that as well. So yeah, it's like being able to look at feminism through through the lens of a Black woman, I guess is the best way I can explain it. But it's saying that your womanhood and your ethnicity, your culture, all that kind of stuff are both important. So the intersection of those things matter in regards to analyzing your experience and that kind of thing. Anyway, I say all that to say that even though intersectionality is one of those terms that's kind of like, I don't want to say it's tossed around a lot or anything like that. I do think in certain spaces it is. And I do think it's become one of those things we're so used to hearing and saying that it's like, do we in reality know what it means? And do we know the implications of it and all that kind of stuff? And so that was on my mind. And so when I saw the stuff circulating about Gina Rodriguez and her foolishness, that's what it made me think of. It's really important that we know we have to kind of like not just look at our lives through an intersectional lens, but navigate them that way. Like, we are living intersections. And so it's okay for us to be specific about that and not feel like we got to shoulder everybody else's intersections, because we can't do that. You know, people can fight their own battles and we can be supportive without having to do all the damn work. It's okay for us to specifically say, hey, this is what I go through as a Black person, and I can't, you know, speak for all people of color and carry the burdens of all people of color. So intersectionality is important. Everything is colored by, I always say colored by our Blackness, but that's the best way that I know how to explain it. And, you know, other people of color, their experiences are colored by their, you know, their various, you know, ethnicities and stuff like that, but it's different colors. So it's not colored the same. It's just not, like, literally and figuratively, it's not colored the same. So there are differences, and it's okay for there to be differences. And we don't have to be the people that shoulder everything, because nobody else is expected to do that. There are so many expectations placed on us that no one else has. So, yeah. So anyway, okay, I'm done for real. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I really appreciate it. Like I've mentioned before, always open to your feedback, questions, your comments, your letters, your whatever it is. You can call in, you can email me, you can send me a message via Facebook, you can slide in my DMs, whatever you need to do. I'm always down to include you all in the conversation. Of course, my email is blkradquwer@gmail.com. So Black Rat Queer, but that's the only place where the spelling is different. So blkradquwer@gmail.com. I can be reached there. I can be reached, slide on in the DMs on Instagram, on Black Rat Queer on there. Same on Facebook, same on Twitter. You can, and then there's always the Google Voice line as well, which the number is always included in the show notes. You can call, you can leave a voicemail, you can call, I might answer the phone, we can have a conversation. We can hop on Skype and talk, we can record our conversation, whatever it is that you want to do. I'm also still doing the BRQ love letters. So send in your love letters and we can get those on the air, all that good stuff. I definitely, you know, always want to include you all, because a lot of times, you know, comments from listeners and all that really are inspiring. I appreciate the feedback, and thank you to everyone who's left reviews, who sent me messages, just any and everybody that supports the show. I appreciate it. I am still very much in awe that y'all listen to me every week, but I am very appreciative of it. Until next time, that's it, y'all. I'm out. Bye, y'all. Black Radical Queer Podcast is all about intersectionality and Black queer folks sharing our stories on our own terms. We navigate an array of identities, and BRQ is an outlet where we can see the spectrum of those identities reflected, explored, and celebrated. Black Radical Queer is a ManeHustle Media podcast hosted by Javi Nicole, produced and edited by Charmaine Johnson. Music is by Publicity. You can find us on social media by looking up Black Rat Queer as BLK RAD QWR. We are on Facebook as well as Instagram and Twitter. Same handle regardless, at Black Rat Queer. BLK RAD QWR. We also have a Facebook discussion group that's just called BRQ Discussion Group, and you can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. So we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, Google Play, you know, all those types of things, and we have, you know, our home base that's on Libsyn, so you can listen on there as well. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Make sure you come on back around next week to see what we have for you, and all right, y'all, I'm out.
ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.